Welcome to the first meetup into our new series of Women in Software Engineering. Bit of background for those of you that are new to the Women in Tech Republic. Myself and some of the colleagues at Third Republic have founded this community over the last year or so. Since then, we've been able to grow out the community to around 2,500 women in tech. This is across UK, US, Germany and Netherlands. At the beginning of July, we run our first global Women in Tech Week, which saw over 500 attendees across 4 events, which was actually held virtually. Now we are here running our first virtual software engineering event. So tonight we've got 2 lovely ladies, experienced and successful in engineering. So we've got Monica, the VP of Engineering at Giant Swarm and founder at Tupu, and Madhu, a domain architect at ING. I'm going to pass you over to Monica and we'll kick that off with her.
Yeah, so today I would like to talk about leading distributed teams. And as Serena said already, I'm a VP of Engineering for Giant Swarm. So basically, first I want to kind of discuss a bit about the terminology. So what on-site engineering team means, basically, if you think of a traditional company that has a headquarters somewhere, an office, and then, basically most of the companies nowadays are like this. And then imagine that company kind of starts hiring people outside the headquarters. Maybe they have contractors that are basically based in other countries. Or maybe people are starting to work, let's say 2 or 5 days from home. So the company then becomes more and more a remote company. And distributed company is something that we call a company that doesn't really have a headquarters, and most of the engineers or all the engineers or all the people in the company are working from home. And in this presentation, I want to concentrate more on a distributed company. And I want to go together to kind of understand and show you the advantages and disadvantages and maybe some of the tips that I have of how to run successfully distributed teams. So a bit about my background here. Well, first, let's see some example of distributed companies. I think it's quite nice that more and more companies nowadays, they kind of moved into this direction of being a distributed company. And I think this Corona crisis really helped in this direction. And maybe some companies were towards that direction of becoming a more distributed company, but because of Corona, probably you already see news that big companies in tech, they are kind of shutting their headquarters and they are kind of moving towards having a more remote, more distributed approach. And there are so many examples here, right? And I try to put a few on this slide. So Envision, Sketch, Grafana Labs, Circle CI, AlphaZero, Elastic, and I guess the list goes on. There are quite a lot of companies that already follow this example. And now a bit of my experience and why I'm talking about this subject. Currently, I'm a VP of Engineering at Giant Swarm. I joined Giant Swarm pretty soon, I think one or 2 months ago. Before, I was working for more than 5 years at Elastic. I was leading multiple teams there for 5 years. So Elastic, as well as Giant Swarm, is a fully remote company, and most of the people are working from home and based engineers as well, right? So most of the people. So basically, I just want to kind of share with you some of the advantages that distributed company brings. Yeah, so the first one is kind of obvious. So being distributed means that you work from home, and I think it's not really a big problem in Europe, but it's a big problem in the US, where you have to commute to work at least an hour a day. And you can imagine how much time you can save by not commuting and basically going to work can mean sometimes getting out of the bed and just walking 2 steps to your desk, and then you can start your day. So I think this saves a lot of your time. This also saves a lot of stress that you have to go through, going back and forth here and there. And also, I also read recently that this is also can improve your health as well, because you don't have to deal with this extra stress. So another thing that is important here is flexible schedule. So you don't have to follow the traditional schedule that, like working from 9 to 5. You can decide yourself which hours you want to work. Also, depending on the team, and to make it to kind of decide your schedule also in order to have a bigger overlap with your team. But having this option or having a flexible schedule and being able, for example, to just go to the doctor in the morning or in the middle of the day, or just attend some events if you are, for example, a mom and you just need to attend some important events that otherwise it would have been kind of difficult, that you have to come from the office, go to this football event, I don't know, that your kids are in. And this is makes your life a bit easier and maybe more pleasant by having this flexible schedule. This also helps you with being able to have a balance between work and personal life. And I think here it's I already mentioned the obvious examples, right? And I think, in my opinion, being able to do in a day whatever you like, I think this is very important for being happy. And I think one of the main goals of a company is to have happy employees. And with this, having this flexibility and being able to have a more balanced work life, this kind of helps you as well. And another big advantage is that you can hire the best people in the world. So you are not tied to a city, you are not tied to a country or things like this. And this is something that I also have seen in my career. At the beginning of my career, I was working for this startup in Berlin, and it was very difficult for us to kind of go and convince people from US and Australia even to move to Berlin, because Berlin was not the most exciting city in Europe and or in the world, so it was kind of hard for us to bring some good talented people in the company. But being fully remotely and being able to hire people all over the world, it kind of helps you as well, to kind of get the best people and have the opportunity to also work with the best people in the world. And I think this also allows you to have a more diverse team, which is, I think, in my opinion, is very important. Diversity also, drives innovation, and there were so many studies that kind of prove that by having a diverse team, not necessarily gender-wise, but also, knowledge-wise, seeing things from different perspectives, from different cultures, also makes a better product. Yeah, and this also boosts innovation. And I think, from my point of view, innovation is essential for the success of a product and for success of a company. It's worth mentioning. But not everything is nice. I think there are also some disadvantages or some challenges I would like to mention that I think we need to also present. And I think one of them is communication. So I think for me, this was the biggest struggle at the beginning, when I kind of moved from the traditional company that everyone was in an office to like a fully remote company, and because you suddenly need to explain some very technical topics, not on a whiteboard, but like with words. And this was kind of the biggest challenge for me. But so it took me a few months for it to kind of accommodate and adjust my style to make it work. So communication, I think it's it's an important one. And I think keep everyone on the same page also becomes more challenging, because maybe in an office you can just bump into someone and you can let them know about what was decided in a meeting or what was discussed in a meeting. But this is something that you don't have if the entire team is just virtually, and it's just it's like remote, right? So I think keeping everyone on the same page is important, and also you have to make a conscious effort in making this happen, right? So I don't really count anymore how many times I said the same story, like how many times I share with the team the vision and where we want to go and things like this. But I think these are important in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So another thing is that working remotely also means that you also have to work independently. It's like it's hard to rely on a colleague to come and help you when you have questions. You are the one that needs to you are given a project and then you have to work on it. And this is something that because of that, I think it's important to hire more senior engineers that don't need so much guidance to work independently. And time zones, I think, is the most challenging thing in a remote company. I would say it's challenging if the company is distributed across multiple time zones, like US, Europe, and even Australia. So in the previous company at Elastic, my teams were distributed across US and Europe, and it was a challenge for us because imagine that you have to find time for meetings that fit everyone. And I think it's also need to feel very, also think about the others, that sometimes if you want to have a meeting at 3 p.m. European time or Berlin time, this also can maybe 6 a.m. On the east side of US. So you have to try to balance like the best time for you might be the worst time for the others, and try to find a common ground and try to find a time that fits everyone. And sometimes when you have so many meetings, it's kind of hard. So this was kind of the biggest challenge, I think, for us here. Now at Giant Swarm, where I'm working currently, it's the company is more based in Europe, and we also have people on the East Coast of the US. So we have more overlap. So this makes much easier, the whole collaboration between people in the teams. Yeah, isolation. I think that this is also something that maybe you don't realize at the beginning, but I think not everyone can adjust to work in a fully distributed company, because it's true, you kind of need to do things by your own. And sometimes, if you are the person that wants to have a social life or wants to kind of always meet the colleagues, the only way you can do it in such a distributed company is by, working from a co-working space or things like this. And I think, it always, and I think Corona times didn't make this easier with isolation. So because people, everyone was isolating at home, and they were not able to go to work from co-working space and things like this. So I think this make it maybe a bit worse during the Corona times. But I think this is important, because otherwise, if you have people that, also another thing, I think you also have to have people that feel part of the team. So for example, you can't, if someone is working in Australia, you can't schedule a meeting during their, like in the middle of the night or something like this. So, because that for sure will make this person be isolated from the rest of the team. If that person is in Australia and the rest of the team is in US or Europe, right? So I think there are multiple levels of isolation, but I think this is a biggest challenge, or this is one of the biggest challenge of having a distributed company. And another one is overwork. And I have here, it's like people are saying that it became impossible to turn off because I'm connecting 24/7. And this is because when you have teams across multiple continents, there's always someone that is doing their working times and then that it has an idea or wants to speak with you. So you are always asked by different people, no matter where they are. So it's sometimes it's kind of hard to say, now I'm not answering anymore to any question. So I think this is something that you need to pay attention, because I think it's very easy to get burnt out. Yeah, so I want to also discuss a bit how you set up your day, because I think that's one of the challenges that you have. For example, imagine that you are a new employee into such a distributed company. And I think nowadays it's like, I think most of you here, even if you are not working before a distributed company, you are now because of the Corona time. So that's not, unfortunately, that's more like not an exception anymore. So I think the important thing is to use the right tools for that. And we are living now in an area where there are a lot of options to choose from. So probably you all are already using Slack for chatting with your colleagues or video conference like Zoom, Google Meet, or Skype, or anything like this. But they help, right? They help with that. They were built with this idea in mind to be used by distributed teams. But I think Slack also, like I said, it's always can also be a colleague that wants to ask you something, even if it's about a pull request review or about a technical question. And sometimes I guess many of you experience that you have a lot of Slack messages and you I need to work and need to concentrate on something, so I don't want to answer all the messages now. So I think reduce distractions, it's something that you need to try to plan. For example, like they have now I'm concentrating for 2 hours, let's say, and I'm not answering to any interaction from the others, right? And I think that's fine, right? So it's up to you to decide how you want to schedule. And believe me, this is something that you won't make it perfect from the first iteration. It will be a few iterations until you feel like now I finally set up my day in a way that I feel productive and I feel good and I feel like this doesn't affect my health and things like this. Yeah, and this is work more asynchronously than synchronously. I think this is something that, I don't know, I think people have this tendency to ask a question and expect to receive an answer immediately. But I think in a distributed company, it's important to learn to do things more asynchronously. Meaning, for example, if you are creating a pull request, you don't have to expect for a review immediately. You can just say, okay, maybe take a day or so, and then you expect a review from your colleagues, or maybe it's a question of anything. So I think we also have to, think also about the time of our colleagues and try not to distract them too much from their working setup, if you want. So one of the things that people do, for example, if they have a list of questions, they make a list of questions and then you can ask them once, or things like this. Anything that kind of sorts basically the number of interactions that you have to do in order to get the answers that you want. And I think this is something, so, because if you're working in a distributed company, you tend to, especially if you are working in different time zones, you tend to get invitations to meetings that are at the time where you get the dinner with your family or things like this, or at the time that you want to spend time with your family. So I think it's very important to feel like you can block your calendar and say, this is family time, I'm not accepting any meeting, this is a time when I want to have dinner, or this is a time when I want to do sport, or anything that makes you feel like, feel good, right, in a way. So I think this is something that I think many people are like, including myself at the beginning, like they didn't feel like, they kind of felt, bad in a way to block their calendar, but this is very important because I think it stressed you a lot. And for me, it was a stress because, for dinner, for example, I knew that I have just half an hour between two meetings in order to prepare a meal, and it stressed me a lot because, it's kind of impossible from my point of view to make a meal and also to eat with your family in half an hour. So this kind of stressed me a lot, and then I realized that it doesn't make sense to be stressed by things like this. Just block your calendar and this will make your life easier. So recognize work. I think this is important because, it's kind of different, I would say, from a traditional company. And I think in a distributed company, and I think also in a traditional company, you have to judge like this, but now we're concentrating on like more distributed companies. I think as a manager, if you want, I think it's important to judge people by their results and not by the working hours. Anyway, in a distributed environment, you can't really count the number of hours each individual worked. So I think it's important to just look at the results and over a longer period of time, like for example, 3 months, and then judge if someone really did a good job and performed at your expectations, for example. And I think this, because of this environment, because people are asked to work independently, because people are happier because of the nature of having a flexible schedule and all of this. I think they kind of feel like they have the freedom to innovate, and this is, in my opinion, very important for the success of the company, because often ideas or big ideas or crazy ideas are coming from engineers, and I think it's important to kind of build an environment where they can feel like they can come with any crazy idea that can become a really successful product and can differentiate the company on the market. Give early feedback, and when it's needed, also make it constructive. And why I'm saying early is because I think here is like normally, right? So this is something that you will anyway do as a manager, for example. Even if in a traditional company, I think it's important to share your feedback as early as possible, not wait for 3 months if a project, you feel like the project is not going into the right direction. But I think you also have to be careful here, right? Not to be seen as a critic, but to be constructive with feedback. And career growth is also another topic that I want to discuss here. I feel like when you are in a distributed environment, you need to trust more people, because you can't really follow what each individual is working on. And I think this is something that is very hard for some managers, because they don't really know what the team is working on, like precisely and exactly when they're working on this. So it's very important to trust the people. And I think it's really interesting to see, like, if people see that you trust them, they feel like, and if you also encourage people to drive projects by themselves, they feel like they can make a difference in the company, and also they can feel like their project is like their baby, and they want to put as much effort, and as much thinking into that. Mentorship is also important, like in any company, and I think it's kind of interesting that how you will do mentorship in such a remote environment. And I think the only difference is that instead of having a face-to-face interaction between mentor and mentee, this will be just online, over a video conference, using a video conference tool. So I don't think this is different, but I think mentorship is very important to concentrate on and try to put effort. And I think, most of the big companies in tech, they have their own mentorship programs. We also have this at Elastic, where basically you define a few mentors, and then some mentees are signing up to this program, and then you do the match between the mentor and mentee. In most of the cases, I've seen, usually the mentee has a problem, either a problem that they face in the company and they are not sure how to solve it, or they want to grow in their career and their manager, or they feel like their manager cannot really help them. So I've seen, like I said, I've seen this in a lot of big companies. And the problem is that, smaller companies, it's kind of hard to implement such a mentorship program, just because there are not enough people. But also I know, for example, at Google, that they are not really doing something like this, or people are suffering from the lack of mentorship. So I think also at big companies, there is a need. So I found this need, and I found that there is a need for people to be able to be part of a mentorship program. And for this, I built this non-profit organization. It's called tupu.io. And basically what we are trying to do is free. So it's free for mentors and for mentees. And anyone can sign up as a mentor, and anyone can sign up as a mentee. And we are doing the matching ourselves, or as a mentee, you can also request a specific mentor. And basically, we are trying to solve this, to offer this for free, because I know that there are so many programs out there that they charge quite a bit of money for this. And, not everyone is working on a big company, and not everyone has the potential to be part of this mentorship program. And I'm joining, so a few so Maria and Madalena, I think they're also here, and they help me with, making this awesome. And they are also part of the audience. So feel free to try it out. And now if you have questions, I would love to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Monica. That was really informative. One of the first questions was, how do you replace the informal chats at the coffee machine? I found this was the best place to find the team, like the team's real feelings.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. The way I'm doing it, for example, is one-on-ones. So I think, in the traditional, anyone can have one-on-ones, but me as a manager, for example, I'm having one-on-ones with everyone, or I'm trying to have with everyone one-on-ones. And basically, you can place this chit-chat if you want in the one-on-ones. And the one-on-ones are, not for me to get an update from each individual, what the status and how much work they've done on this and that, but just to, to make sure that people feel comfortable with sharing the concerns they have, or, they can bring any topic that they want to discuss. And I think, in my opinion, this distributed environment or remote environment makes it easier, because I think maybe some people will be more nervous to ask you something that is maybe a delicate problem face to face than over Zoom, for example. So I think this helps in this regard.
How do you maintain the human connection when working remotely? So we're so used to connecting in real life, and now remotely, like, the relationships get colder. So similar sort of question, so like more of an objective approach that can affect the collaboration?
No, that's a very good question. So I can tell you that from my experience, I think in a remote environment, you tend to have closer relationship or closer connection to colleagues than in an office. And this is because, I don't know, so you see the others in their own environment, you see them sometimes when you have the calls at 11 p.m., you see them in pajama, you see them with their family around them, and you see the person in their comfortable zone. And people tend to be more informal, right? So it's like, okay, now I'm with my kids on the lap and I'm gonna talk with you about this technical problem. Then in an office, I think we as humans, when we enter the office, we just enter into this formal, I'm now a formal person, I'm very professional, I'm just, I leave everything behind. And so I think, I don't know, so it's kind of interesting, but I think you tend to have like closer relationship with people over Zoom. And also, I mean, like most of the companies are doing this, like they still meet face-to-face twice a year or once a year, depending on the company, in order to also have like a chance to also meet face-to-face, right? And do some activities together and things like this.
So I mean, there's two questions that are quite similar, asking around like how onboarding of new members works in distributed teams and how it is different covering with on-site and onboarding, and also sort of going under the question around like how do new employees get to know their own team, obviously from onboarding remotely.
So I don't think the onboarding is different in a remote environment. It's just, I think you tend to write more in a remote setup, in the sense that you want to have fully documented, like what are the things that you need to, or the new employee needs to know when they joined, like, the processes, like what's the best way to open a pull request, or what's the best way to tackle a topic, or I don't know, things like this. So I think also in a traditional company, you do something like this. So the way we did it, for example, for onboarding, we assign a buddy, and basically the buddy will kind of answer all the questions that the new employee has. But I think that's something that I guess you will also do in a traditional company, in an on-site company. So I don't think it's very different, right? It's just that you do everything over Zoom instead of being in an office. I think with the new employees, you have to make sure, for example, that they can attend the meetings, so they don't feel like left out and things like this. But I think, that's the only concern that I think now.
There was a question around how do you think the working remote culture affects career changing engineers that are new to the industry?
I think the remote culture doesn't really affect your career changing. I don't know. It's just, in a way, I like to call it that it's a more modern way. So for me, for example, that I left Elastic and I was looking for a new position, for me, it would be really difficult to go back and work from a company that has an office, just because, I was working for 5 years in a remote environment, and you feel like you have the advantages that you have, then it's kind of hard for you. Or now I have to go to the office, or I have to wake up early, or, I have to do this and that. And for me, it was kind of showstopper to work for a company that has an office somewhere. So I think it affects you a bit because you get used to this and then it's hard to go back. But I wouldn't say that this affects your career changing.
Would you mind elaborating on like servant leadership? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, sure. So servant leadership means, it's everyone cares about micromanagement, and I think servant leadership is someone that empowers the people to drive projects by themselves, to come up with ideas or new innovations. Someone that, I think in my opinion, someone that doesn't feel like it's your manager. It's someone that can help you reach your goals. Someone that, I think I always say that me as a manager, my main role is to make people happy and drive and guide them towards being successful. Because I think no one really says that, okay, or the success of a manager is the same as the success of a team, right? So basically, the mentor is just a facilitator of this success, right? So I think that's, I would say, the definition is.
Thank you for that talk. That was really, really useful.
My pleasure.
Now I'll pass over to Madhu, who's speaking around the microservices ecosystem.
So I'd like to talk about the microservices ecosystem. Thanks everyone for listening in. My name is Madhu Sivasubramanian. I work at ING Bank as an architect in Amsterdam. So first thing I would like to say is it was quite a challenge to narrow down this topic to a short time. It's quite huge. There's a lot of things to talk about microservices, where they came from. There's many different tools and you can go in depth in everything. But then I chose a few things. I hope you still have something to take away that's valuable for you. Where did microservices start from? I'd like to give a quick recap of what was before them, where it started, and then what special challenges they bring. Then the ecosystem around them that evolved and tried to address some of these challenges, and then the patterns and tools that came up in this ecosystem. So first thing is what was before microservices. A regular application, which is now called a monolith. It's a single application. Here's an example of a hospital administration with different modules. So you have all the modules sitting in the same application and it's deployed as one. They all share one single database and they do a cohesive unit of work to achieve a business goal. So they share the overheads and they communicate just by method calls inside the application. Maybe optionally they expose an API. Now there's no problem with it, except for when it grows really big and the single application becomes unmanageable, or you start out with 5 developers and then you need to scale it up to 30 developers, all of them working on the same code base. The builds start becoming slow and all the tests that you run becomes slow. So that's a moment where you think, okay, isn't there a better way to solve this? Do all these modules need to be sitting in the same application and running in the same process? So that's where microservices come in. And in this model, it's the same business functionality that is being solved, but then you have a split up. All of these modules are broken up into their own little applications. Hopefully they are little. They are independently deployable and they will run in separate processes at runtime. So that makes the footprint quite small at runtime. But of course, everything comes with a trade-off, right? So you do need these modules to then still communicate with each other to achieve the common business goal. So they do this by using APIs and asynchronous communication with events or something else. And the other thing to note is they all have separate databases. So now there's no shared database. There are smaller databases all around for all the different modules. Then each of these now, because you've split it up, can be owned by a separate team, maybe a remote team, maybe somebody in a different continent can own each of these. And then they can also be written in different languages, different technology stacks. So that gives you quite a bit of flexibility. And with flexibility comes also trade-offs, but yeah. Then the other thing that the ecosystem is going to help with is basically all of these servers that are now running in production. So you'll have, instead of one application with maybe replication and redundancy, you're running 7 different applications, 7 databases in this example. So what are some main, if you try to condense all the requirements of microservices, there's a bunch of them. And just a summary of that is there are many moving parts. So you need to coordinate a lot between all these moving parts. And you need to be able to provision these applications quickly. You need to get a server up and running soon. And you need to be able to deploy quickly, because if there is a bug in one of those applications, everybody else is depending on that, and you need to have a smoothly running CI/CD pipeline. Some of these things are true even for a monolith, but we started with the premise that a monolith has become too big to build quickly. So now we are talking about these requirements for microservices. And the other thing that you need to have for good microservices in production is mechanisms for security, observability, and resilience. Although you can say this is the same thing for any application, with microservices that so much communication is going on between the different microservices, so there is extra requirements on these topics. So basically security between microservices you need to take care of, and monitoring, you need to monitor all of them in a somewhat uniform way so that you can look at one dashboard and get some outputs. Resilience, if one of these things goes down, what happens to the rest? Is it going to have a cascading effect? So these are the kind of things you have to now start worrying about. There comes the ecosystem. So the ecosystem has kind of developed and evolved after microservices became very popular, and they try to help the journey with microservices. There's a lot of tools and patterns that are available today. So I will focus on 4 areas here. One of them is API management, which you do both before deploying something, so that is at design time, as well as at runtime when something is running in production. Then you have the concept of service discovery and load balancing, which is a runtime thing. Then you have API gateways and what is called a service mesh. So I'd like to go over each of these items. With API management, starting at design time, firstly is the life cycle of an API. You start by designing it, developing and testing the API. And there are standalone tools for these, pretty good ones for doing these things. That is tools like Postman, Swagger. There's quite a lot else out there as well. And then once you've built these APIs, you want to publish them in some kind of a portal so that people can find your APIs and call them or register to start using them. So this is a developer portal, and it's basically an interface between a producer of an API and a consumer, so they can formalize that they will actually be using this set of APIs. And what needs to be on this developer portal? There is an API catalog, which is basically documentation of your API, and a function to search. So if you want to search for, how do I do adding a user? What API call do I need to make? Then you should be able to search in the API catalog. So those are some features for this catalog. And then you have what is called a client registry for APIs. Because we are formalizing all these contracts between the microservices, the producer and consumer, they need to be more formal about who's consuming what interface. And clients need to register at the design time to say that I'm going to be consuming this set of endpoints from this API. And this serves 2 purposes. One is to just manage the APIs better, to know who's consuming it from the producer side. And the other is to use at runtime to give the right permissions for these clients towards to restrict them for only certain endpoints or to do all these kind of checks. The second part of API management is at runtime, and there we talk about a few topics, which is starting with API security. Now that you have these multiple microservices exposing their APIs, they are all independent, remember? So they need to just function on their own, which means you can't also trust the other microservices. You don't have any guarantees. You need to authenticate every time you make a call to each other. And this is typically done with what is called mutual TLS at the transport layer. And it's called peer-to-peer authentication because a server calls another server, and that's where the authentication needs to be done. When you have a web client or an external mobile client or a third party calling your company's APIs, then you want something a bit stronger. And there you have the OAuth 2 kind of frameworks where you can do permission checking, authorization. It also helps with authenticating an individual user. So these are all concerns within API management, and we will see later how some tools help to solve these things. not just these frameworks. The next thing you worry about is to check whether everything is running well in your production setup. And you do this by monitoring or setting up proper monitoring and alerting. Some of the things you have to do is send metrics from your application so that it can be stored in some kind of a data store and used for monitoring later. One of those things, tools for sending out metrics is called Prometheus. It's an open source tool. And once you send out metrics from each of your microservices, of course, you agree on some standards of how you will structure these metrics. And you can visualize them with something like Grafana, which is a dashboard for showing time series data in a nice, friendly way. And the last thing on API management is monetizing your APIs. You may or may not want to do this, but if you do it, then you charge user of the API by some metric, number of calls or volume of data consumed or something like that. This all can also be done by some tools in a more generic way. The second topic is service discovery and load balancing. So there are two flavors for this. I'll go with the general concept of service discovery first and then the flavors. Why do you need service discovery? Because in the old setup, there was just one application. You knew fixed what its URL was, how to call that application. And even if it had an API, that was a fixed configuration. But in this setup, when you have, in my example, there are 7 or 8 microservices, but in an enterprise, you can have hundreds of microservices across different teams. So then how do these microservices discover each other at runtime? So the only way that happens is everyone registers with something called a service registry. This is basically a server that has a master list of all the running instances. So when a new microservice comes up or a new instance is spinned up, then you register that instance itself self-registers with this service registry. And when a consumer wants to call this API, first it needs to look up in the service registry and find the list of all the instances that give you this service. And from those instances, it needs to choose one and call. That is the load balancing part. So typically in client-side load balancing, that means each consumer, which also you imagine is one of these microservices, that will have its own little piece of load balancing code. So once it gets a list of instances, it can know how to route a particular request. Then server-side load balancing is when the client knows nothing about the service registry or all the instances of a microservice. The client just in the old way makes this request to a load balancer endpoint, and that load balancer does this lookup. And the service registry still is there. The load balancer looks it up and gets the instances and then reroutes the call to the actual instance. So these are the two types of models for service discovery. Then the next topic is API gateway, which sort of has an overlap with API management and also with the following topic, which is service mesh. But for what it's worth, there are vendors providing each of these separately. So I will deal with this in a separate way. API gateway is at the edge of your organization. What that means is all external communication needs to go through the API gateway. So a web front end or a mobile front end, when it makes requests to your microservices, that all comes in through the API gateway. And same as for partners who consume your APIs or just third-party clients. So this API gateway does quite a lot of different things. Firstly, it encapsulates your complexity. It doesn't let the outside world know that there are thousands of microservices that you need to call each one separately. It just transparently routes the calls because you have configuration in there, or you also internally, it does the lookup to the service registry. So this, by the way, is an example of server-side load balancing, because the API gateway is a server and that looks up on behalf of these web and mobile clients. It looks up the instances and routes the calls. It can also do authentication, security. You can terminate HTTP, the secure HTTP at the gateway if you like. It can do other functions like rate limiting so that no caller is allowed to flood your system, and logging of every call that comes in. That can also be done here centrally. Monetization of APIs, it's also a possibility on the gateway because it's one entry point for all externals. Then we come to the final topic, which is service mesh. Service mesh, first maybe I should talk about what microservices need to do additionally and why a service mesh can help in these concepts. So as we know, each microservice has to do extra security measures, and it needs to you need to write some code in it for observability. That means logging extra metrics, logging uniformly, having some trace headers, things like that. And resilience, also high availability, and what happens when your service is down, what happens to the other microservices, and so on. So instead of every microservice repeating all these technical aspects of the code, Service Mesh tries to take out these aspects into what is called a sidecar proxy. So the sidecar runs next to the microservice, one per instance of microservice. So the sidecar does all of these because all the calls to your microservice is intercepted by the sidecar first. And then these aspects are taken care of, additional headers, whatever is added, and then the call comes into you. You don't need to take care of these. You can just focus on your functional aspects. So currently the service meshes out there, they cater to HTTP and Google RPC protocols. So your microservices need to, of course, have these protocols. The other thing is security. We talked about mutual TLS for server to server communication. The sidecar can also extract this part out. So your microservice is more light. And injecting trace headers, this means if you have a whole chain of calls, let's say if a user logs in and wants to schedule an appointment in this hospital administration system, you need to call the user management module, you need to call the scheduling module and the notification module. If you have one transaction ID that runs through all of these, then it's easy to debug and troubleshoot when something goes wrong. Did the call go at all to the notification module? Where did it fail? So all this can be taken care of by the service mesh. Resilience, some specific features offered for this by different service meshes are about having zero downtime deploys. And this means you have two sets of nodes, active and passive, or called blue and green. And when you're deploying to one set, the other set can still be active. And then you switch it to the other set and deploy the final set. This is one thing. And you can have things like canary releases, where you want to release a new feature to a small subset of your users rather than to everyone. This all is enabled with, of course, you can write code for it in your microservice, but the idea of service mesh is you take out all of these aspects and do it separately and once. So every microservice can simply benefit from using that. And when you have to call APIs, you also have to worry about how many times do you call it. If you don't get a 200 response, then you need to call it again. But the number of retries, then how to back off, and when to break the circuit, all of these things are handled uniformly in a service mesh. I think that's pretty much all the topics of content. What I would like to now share is how to choose your tools. So in this whole landscape, there's quite a lot of different tools and overlapping functionality. So you have many criteria that you need to look out for. I would like to just very high level overview of these criteria is, do you already have hosting on a particular platform? Let's say you're on Amazon or Azure, and then some of these choices are already more natural for using the platform's native gateway, for example. Or you might have a corporate policy that dictates that you need to be on the cloud or you need to not be on the cloud or whatever it is. Then the other thing to consider is whether you want to only use open source tools or whether you're fine with proprietary tools, and how extensible are these. And with open source, the question is there support, and do you need support? Then you have the question of whether you want these gateway and other tools hosted on your site, in your infrastructure, or can it be cloud hosted? If you're already on the cloud, of course, this is not a question. And then there are, as I said, overlapping features. So you want to look out for which one you want to use from where. And then what is the community around these tools look like? Is it active? Are there a lot of people answering questions? And will you get support informally from the community? And then, of course, the price and what kind of paid support it offers. So these are some of the key players in all the areas I talked about, that is API management, API gateway, and service mesh. If you see, many of these names are repeating. Kong is one of the key players, and Tyke.io, RPG, which got taken over by Google. Amazon has its own gateway and Azure has its own gateway. And in terms of service mesh, there's quite a lot of different options. But also the functionality between service mesh and API gateway, those are more and more service meshes are offering also gateway functionality. And many of them use one underlying technology, which is Envoy. So it's kind of converging to a certain point. So finally, I would like to share a few thoughts on this whole topic. Firstly, monoliths are not a bad thing. If you have a well-designed monolith and that serves your purpose, there's no need to rush around and rewrite it as microservices. And for your purpose, if you're a startup or if you're starting a new project within a corporate, you need to start simple. And as your application needs grow, you can scale up and out. But if you start with over-engineering, it's very difficult to bring it all in and scale down. That will be a huge refactor. So keep that in mind to start simple and explore and maximize what tools are out there already. There's no point writing your own service mesh if you know that there are 5 different service meshes you can choose from. And tools are also evolving. So if you do choose to write your own, be aware that you can evaluate again in a couple of years and maybe be ready to refactor and use an industry standard one. And yeah, some of these concepts and patterns like API gateway, they are not necessarily restricted to microservices. They can be used for any kind of application within your network boundary. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you, Madhu. That was really interesting. I have a few questions in the chat. How is the trust authentication between services internally arranged when working with an API gateway and which would be externally faced?
So for external applications, you need more trust and more security. Whereas for internal applications, you can do something more lightweight. Typically, how this is implemented is, like I said, with mutual TLS, which is authenticating a consumer to a producer and a producer to a consumer. This mutual trust is only possible within your internal network boundary, not for external customers. For external customers, you have more elaborate frameworks like OAuth 2, where you do authorization with specific endpoints, and it's a stricter way of checking the permissions. You can encrypt, of course, internally as well, depending on the risk appetite your company has, how you want to treat the internal ones.
Another question was around like the cloud platforms. Do you have a preference when it comes to different cloud platforms, and if so, why?
Yeah, I guess I do in a way, because I've worked for 5 years with AWS and it has pretty much all the functionality that I have looked for. So I definitely am more comfortable with it, but that's only a personal preference, right? It's not to say that you must only use that. What I do know is that now working in a more corporate environment, it seems the enterprises and corporates tend to go towards Azure. And smaller companies, startups choose between Google and AWS. And one of the key reasons for this is the perception of safety and security. Typically, these companies already have their email in the Outlook or Microsoft Cloud, and that gives them an additional reason to go there. And the other thing is, Azure also has a nice integration with company Active Directory, and login for employees is made a lot easier. Yeah, probably Amazon also has that, but this is the perception, and a lot of enterprises tend to choose Azure.
I mean, Out of interest, Monica, in terms of like cloud platforms, has there been one that you've tended to stick to?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a preference, but I think I agree. So most of the companies now are using AWS, but I would say that Azure is catching up, and I think it will in the future we'll hear more about Azure. Yeah, about Google, I think they are a bit behind, but yeah, it's that's also my perception. But I can't say that I have like a preference in this regard.
Yeah.
Just have one question for Monica. You were saying about people feeling more comfortable to do the Zoom meetings, as I don't know, if the meeting is at 11 p.m. they will show up in pajamas and everything, which I totally agree, it's cool. But for example, in the environment that I work in right now, it's pretty hard to show up in your pajama in your team meeting or whatever kind of meeting you're having. And for me and my team, for example, remote working, I'd say has done more bad than good for the team composition and how they interact. Like at the beginning, they're all working together. I'm managing a desk side team. So they were so used to working in campus, in the office, and collaborate well and help each other. And the campus is pretty big. There are like 12 buildings and we're supporting all of them. So even though we don't have all the users in campus right now, I think we have about 90%, about 10% and 90% working from home. That made me split the team and do a rotation base where some of them are working from home and some others are coming to campus. And the fact that they don't get to see each other on a daily basis and work together has kind of gotten the relationship and the collaboration between them get colder. Whereas at the beginning they were working together, so they were a bit more understanding with each other. Okay, you made a mistake, let's fix it together. Now it's more of a, oh, that person did that and that person didn't follow the procedure. How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that, or what's the approach on that?
I think it's a big difference between being a company that is fully remote from day one, and being a company that has an office and suddenly they want to become a fully remote company because they don't have the culture, and suddenly they kind of need to change the culture if you want, and this is very hard. And I think this situation with COVID kind of forced people to just go overnight into this remote environment, and people are not used to. So I think they are just expecting that they will do the same, or they're following the same processes that they work in an office, but they might not work in a full remote company. So I think it's very hard to do the changes. You just have to go and look at your processes and try to think not the way maybe if you want to take a step back and think like, okay, we have this problem, or and how you will gonna solve this problem in a remote environment, and not try to basically do the same like you were doing before, but just over Zoom, because I think this doesn't work. So I think this is, it's much harder, if you need to suddenly be a remote culture. And I think also, I also heard, during the COVID times, people are saying that I cannot really work from home because I cannot concentrate, and it's hard to find my pace during the day. But I think, it's hard to compare because, for example, if you are a parent, like you have your kids at home, and it's suddenly, it's hard for you to also feel your duties at work, because you kind of need to balance two things at once. But you can't really compare this, because in a world where the COVID was not existing, and you're your kids will be at daycare or be at school, you will have the freedom at home, and then the quiet environment at home to do your work. And I think people are kind of think like, oh, this is what it means to work from home, right? To kind of have all these distractions. And I think just, COVID makes it a bit difficult. So I don't really have like, I think a secret recipe, like how you will be able to solve this particular problem. But I think it's just that you kind of need to go and see and look at the processes. I don't really like to say this word, but it's just like how you do meetings, like how you, I'm not sure like exactly how you're working in the team, but just, take a step back and think more about how you solve, keep the goal the same, but how you will go towards this goal in a remote environment and think differently. And I think this is hard just because I think this might also change the culture of the team. This might, and this is something that, people like to keep the culture, not change the culture, right? So I think this is very hard.
No, absolutely. How do you get people to get closer and bond over Zoom, for example? Mm-hmm. If you try something in the past, how do you get people to connect and to the point of making friendships and collaborating well and being more understanding and bonding over Zoom?
I mean, it's just a matter of being, not formal but informal, and maybe at the beginning of the meeting, before or while you are waiting for the rest of the people to join the meeting, you can just have a chit chat, similar with a chit chat that you're gonna have if you go in an office to have a coffee or something like this. And I think this is also, it makes a connection between people. You can ask like, I don't know, how is the weather, or things like this, and then basically I think it's a mistake to just stick to the conversation, right? So you have to make to have a balance, and sometimes for me, for example, the one-on-ones are a way to connect between people as a manager, but I also think that people will connect between them to either because they're all in the same meeting, or some people like to do stand-ups and stuff like this, so there will be some chit-chat there. But I think also in addition, so what a lot of companies did during these COVID times, they did virtual events. Like now we are having lunch together, now we are maybe cooking together. Now we are just having maybe beers and celebrate about this awesome release that we just did. I think this is also an important thing. And I think celebrating events usually help, right? Everyone in the team put a lot of effort in this release, let's celebrate it, right? Including this chit chat or like these small discussions in the meetings, but also have additional events, I think might help you. But also it depends on the people, right? So I think, this is basically, I would say, my generic advice, but you also have to look at your team and see like, maybe people are not comfortable with this and that. It also, maybe some people need more talk, especially during these COVID times. Maybe they are going through tough times and they need more talk, and you need to concentrate more on those. So I think it's also, you have to judge by the individuals as well.
Yeah, it's indeed a matter that needs to be treated subjectively and not objectively. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'd just like to say a big thank you to you guys for organizing this. It's been really cool.